Afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly Tuesday digital transformation live stream. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. We're streaming live here to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as Twitch. We're actually streaming to Twitch as well. So thank you for joining here today. Today's topic is going to be software implementation lessons in 2022 and look ahead to 2023. So we're going to discuss what have we learned about digital transformations and software implementations in 2022. What does it mean for our transformations in 2023? What are the trends and lessons that we can take with us as we plan our digital strategies for the coming year? I'll introduce our guests in just a moment, but before I do, just a couple logistical things. One is this is a weekly live stream that we do same time, same place every Tuesday. We stream these live with the intent that this recording or the recording of this conversation will become part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which gets released every Wednesday on audio podcast platforms throughout the world, as well as YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Those episodes get released every Wednesday. So a week from tomorrow is when the episode featuring this interview will be released. So thank you for being part of the live production of the podcast, because you are, whether you know it or not, you are part of the live production of the podcast. So thank you for being here. And then also we are encouraging questions. Any questions you have, the whole reason we do this live is so we can take audience questions and really get your involvement and engagement in the discussion. So please chime in with any questions or comments you have along the way related to the topic. And then last but not least, if you could just drop in the chat right now, wherever you're watching right now, if you could drop in the chat where you're joining from today, what city and country are you in? That helps us understand the global audience a bit better. And it's always interesting to see how widespread this digital transformation community is that we're building here. So thank you for being part of that. And thank you in advance for dropping in the chat where you're joining from today. So again, today's topic, software implementation lessons in 2022 and a look ahead to 2023. Joining me for the discussion is Bonnie Tinder, who's the founder of Raven Intel. Bonnie, thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. You've been on my podcast before. It's been a while, so it'll be good to catch up. And this is a great time of year to have you on the show because we can sort of look back at 2022 and look at what some of the lessons and trends are, and also look ahead to what is the digital transformation space hold for us and what's in store for 2023 as we look ahead to the new year. So I guess just to start, maybe just tell us a little bit about you personally. Tell us about your background and how you kind of grew up in this crazy digital transformation space that we're in.
Yeah, well, I'm located here in Chicago. Eric, I can see your snowy background here. Luckily, we don't have that just yet in Chicago.
Lucky.
I have I spent 25 years in the HR technology space, working for both large SaaS vendors as well as consulting firms. I actually started my career in implementation many moons ago before moving into marketing and analyst relations. And about 4 years ago, I started my company, Raven Intelligence, and have been in that world ever since.
Great. So you've seen a lot in your career, and I know we're going to hone in here on Raven Intel and talk about some of your findings from data that you've captured and analyzed from Raven Intel. But maybe tell us a little bit more about Raven Intel. What is it? What's the website? What's the purpose of it? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so ravenintel.com is our exact address. And we are a peer review site that helps software customers to make a great decision in a consulting partner, or the SIs, as we call them in the business. They're the partner that helps to implement a piece of enterprise software. And I started the company because nothing existed. There was zero transparency in this world of software consulting. And I wanted customers to know what they didn't know before they started an implementation. And so out on ravenintel.com, we have over 2,000 reviews written by customers about these enterprise software projects. And when you think about the word Raven, why did I name the company Raven? It really helps to provide this bird's eye view of implementation and partners. And we provide that data to the marketplace and look at trends overall in terms of the data, and can make sort of some correlations about what's happening in the world of software implementation, based upon what customers are telling us about their projects. So that's what we do at ravenintel.com. Check us out. You can go out there and read all of the reviews that we have available for free.
That's great. And it's such a great resource for just objective views and objective experiences that organizations have had with different implementers and system integrators. Just out of curiosity, I'm already going off script. We had a list of questions that we agreed to ahead of time, and I'm already throwing in a curveball here. But I'm curious, when you started the company, were system integrators and software vendors open to the idea? Did they push back on it? Were they sort of skeptical of the whole idea? Because you're sort of exposing the good, the bad, the ugly of what people's real experiences were versus the marketing and sales messaging that most vendors and system integrators would prefer the customers or potential customers to hear. So how did they respond to you when you created the platform?
It was mixed, honestly. At first, I think there was a lot of hesitation because, this idea of transparency and allowing customers to have a public voice was new in the industry. I would say the best consulting firms ran toward it. They embraced the concept. They wanted to go and get all of their customers to write reviews because they knew that it would illustrate very clearly the positive customer success that they had. The ones who really shied away from it, and it was both a few software vendors as well as, quite honestly, the big consulting firms, the ones that have the money to advertise at the airport. They were the ones that, even to this day, there's hesitation because there's a lot of risk if they had bad implementations. And we know everybody has a bad, one or two bad implementations or more than that, in their portfolio. And so as much as possible, we want to have this platform available to everyone. But I would say, the best firms are the ones who are getting reviewed. And then there's firms that, are not participating, potentially because, there's a mixed amount of sentiment about their projects.
Right. They don't necessarily want that truth to come out. But if you're a potential buyer, of course, you want to see the good and the bad. I mean, I guess if you think about, I've heard you describe Raven Intel as sort of like the Yelp for system integrators. And if you think about just choosing a restaurant or a plumber or a home repair person, you do all this research. We have apps to look at reviews and ratings and all that stuff, but we don't, up until you started Raven, we didn't really have that for our industry. So it's interesting that there'd be any sort of pushback on it because it's such a normal part of, the way we do research as humans now in the internet age.
Yeah. I mean, you buy a $3 product from Amazon and you can read 2,000 reviews about it. And yet customers are spending millions of dollars on these projects and didn't have, really any objective way to see, what was the other customer's experience beyond, what that particular SI was giving them for a reference. There wasn't any way to really look across and see, what was the candid voice of customer. And that's really why I felt like our industry needed it. And I started Raven.
Right. That's great. Well, good. Another, you're a fellow disruptor in the space, which I always enjoy chatting with people like you because you're not afraid to sort of bring that stuff to light. So that's great.
Our industry needs some mixing up. So yes,
they do. Absolutely. Yes, it's we've sort of been stuck in the same routines for 20 or 30 years, and not a whole lot's changed, unfortunately, since I started in the industry. But it really needs to if we're going to be more successful in this space. I guess just to start then, speaking of, shining a light on the industry and just looking into the good, the bad, the ugly of the industry, what are some of the high level findings and implementation results when you look at data that you've captured on the platform here in 2022? What are the general lessons, takeaways, trends, findings, all that stuff for the year so far?
Well, I'll start first with sort of what customer focus has been. So, in general, 2022, we're coming off of pandemic and, getting back to work, a lot of companies back to office. And so this focus that customers have in digital transformation are, at least in projects that I see, how do we care for a hybrid workforce? How do we provide digital tools to both remote workers as well as in-office workers that will help, improve the overall employee experience? I think the second thing, and that's sort of related to it, is the idea that skills and skills management is a top priority. And along with the Great Resignation, there has been a continued war for talent, and particularly in professional services. And I'll talk about this in a little bit. We saw a tremendous amount of churn in the industry. People either leaving to get to retire, and not having other new employees replace them, or they're moving organizations, moving companies within the industry. And so there's this focus on how do we retain our top talent? How do we identify the skills that we have throughout the organization so that we can be strategic internally before having to look externally for candidates? How can we get each and every employee to own their own career journey? So those macro trends, I think, are what caused such a tremendous amount of projects to happen. Is that these companies are realizing, hey, how do we do this? We haven't had to do this as much in the past. How can we quickly flex to accommodating for some of these changes? So that's why I think there's been so many new digital transformations happening, is because of just the flux in the industry and change. In general, though, in terms of now, if I switch gears and look at what did we hear about these projects and what did we hear about implementations, in general, satisfaction is down slightly over 2021. And I think the customer grace that was given during the pandemic is gone. So related to this, or the data point that I have, is that 25% of our customers who wrote reviews this year said that they will shop around before purchasing more software from the vendor that they just implemented. So 25% of them are already thinking, well, before I purchase more software with this particular vendor, I'm certainly going to see what else is available out there. So,
and is that higher than you've seen in years past, that 25%?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is. We also saw 20% of customers say they did not get the value that they expected from their projects. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's a significant portion when you think about how big and how expensive and time consuming these projects are. So, only 2 out of 10 said it missed the mark.
And that's sort of an absolute question. Then is it like you did or you didn't get value out of your system integrator? So that's not even counting the ones that said, yeah, we sort of got some value, but not as much as we paid for or what we expected. Is that true?
That's correct. We asked the question, did you get full value, partial value, or in some cases, did you go backwards? And we have some of them, but the partial value one is that 20%. And then we have a small portion that said we went backwards. Luckily, it's not that huge, but again, that's significant enough that you have to stand up and take notice and think, that's a significant portion who went through a huge process and felt like they got nothing for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's interesting about the 25% that said that they would shop around for other options or other additions potentially to their existing software vendor. To me, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. It sounds like that might be a healthy outcome from 2022. Is that you're keeping your eyes open, keeping your options open, and not necessarily going all in and putting all your eggs in one basket of one software vendor. So
Mhm.
some of these trends might be a good thing. Others might be more concerning, of course.
For sure. I think, best of breed has, you know, is definitely becoming more in vogue. And, one of the, I think, things that we're seeing now in the quarter 4 of this year is that there's a growing share of renewals that are being delayed beyond their scheduled renew date. So
Hmm.
10 to 20% higher than last year. There are customers out there that are saying, or potentially questioning, do I renew the contract with our vendor? And that's, again, that delay is 10 to 20% higher than it was last year. And, I think customers are asking, do we need this? Are we using this? Can we reduce our spend? Can we delay purchasing? These are things that we typically see in quarter 4, but I think some of the economic headwinds that we're seeing right now, this is becoming, more and more a sentiment than it has been in years, and at least last year for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. And so, I guess another way maybe to rephrase this or just make sure I'm tracking with you here. So what you're saying is that these cloud and SaaS subscriptions are in more or at a higher rate not being renewed. And so companies are maybe less likely now than they were in the past to just sort of blindly just keep rolling with the renewals, if particularly if they're not using the software.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
So they're delayed beyond their renewal date, which means that customers are either letting them lapse and will not renew, or they're late in making a payment on the existing system. And part of that is them questioning, is this something that we really need in 2023?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of companies, I think, in the rush to upgrade their technology, partially because of the pandemic, but also partially because a lot of the big software vendors are essentially forcing their customers off the legacy products and forcing them into an upgrade, in some cases prematurely. It sounds like that might be some of the fallout is, they're seeing that, hey, we kind of rushed into things. Maybe we overcommitted, overspend on technology, and now we're really trying to rationalize that a bit. Do you see that in later in the year here as the economy and inflation have sort of taken its toll across the world? Do you see that sort of picking up steam, later in the year as far as companies just being more diligent and conservative about how they spend money on technology?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And I think we saw it creep up sort of quickly, like as even November and October, were happening. But I think even now, with all of the news of the layoffs across the board, even companies and Amazon who've never laid off employees, that's now, a thing. And so I think that's going to have downstream effects on purchasing, you know, throughout, software. And, Eric, to your point earlier, a lot of people got overzealous with their purchases of cloud software, which led to a lot of shelfware. And I think where people's mind is at right now is, how much of this product are we actually using? And I heard somebody refer to it as like there's going to be a SaaS red wedding out there for those applications that nobody's logged into for the last 45 days. So if it's not being used, it's going to get probably canceled in
Right.
2023.
Okay. Now I want to come back to. I know you've got more findings for us, and so I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to go to the audience here real quickly just to sort of recognize some of the feedback we've gotten so far. Thank you for those of you that dropped in the chat where you're joining from today. We have people from all over the world, as I mentioned before. Mohammed from New Jersey, Ryan from Denver, someone on LinkedIn, I can't see the name, but someone's from Atlanta, Grand Forks, North Dakota, Minnesota, Malaysia, North Carolina, India, Germany, Brazil, UK, another London, UK. So thank you everyone for joining, and in some cases joining at strange hours of the day. One thing I want to come back to that you mentioned, Bonnie, and actually this is a question from Diana on LinkedIn. She asked the question of, can you speak to project success and or satisfaction with 100% virtual implementations versus partial on-site project teams, and will we see a different trend in 2023? I know that was one of the first things you mentioned, was that the hybrid delivery teams has sort of changed the way people perceive and engage with their system integrators and their implementers. How does that? Do you see a difference in project satisfaction of among the teams that are maybe have more of a hybrid on-site role versus ones that are 100% remote? Is there any correlation there?
So I don't think there's a correlation necessarily with a delivery of implementation versus on-site teams. And I think a big difference that we have in the last 2 years in terms of virtual delivery is video, and how much more customers are familiar with, comfortable with a video based interaction. So I don't think that there's been a significant change, positive or negative, relative to virtual delivery. What we have seen, though, is the project churn. The team churn is at an all-time high. So in 40% of the projects that we've saw reviewed in 2022, 40% of them said that their team changed somewhat or to a significant degree during the course of a project. So I think that has more to do with the negative satisfaction trend than does the delivery. Are you on site or are you remote? I think in 2023, we'll see more companies wanting to do remote delivery just because of the reduced expense with that. And but the idea that there's been a lot of churn and in professional services where people are moving organization to organization, and also even assignments internally are changing. So particularly with the software vendors that have had an influx of projects, they may have taken project managers off one to go and start another. So that idea of churn is not a good thing for these type of projects, because it leads to a lot of other things like projects being late, knowledge transfer not being there, just team dynamics not being as solid as when the team and you've worked with them throughout the course of a project. So that churn, I think, is a bigger issue than the delivery on site versus remote.
Yeah, and that's always been a sore spot for implementations and system integrators, especially when you have a large team supporting you and you have some turnover on a project. That's always been a challenge, a problem, and a hiccup or a speed bump during a transformation. But what you're saying is that dynamic has become even more prevalent and more common, unfortunately, here in 2022.
Correct.
What are you getting any feedback from what, and you might have alluded to this a few minutes ago when you were talking about, building competencies and some of the internal dynamics of a project team, but are you seeing organizations respond differently in terms of how they hedge against that risk of, disruption to the project because of the turnover on their system integrator side?
Yeah. So I think, the companies who are, how should I say, well experienced with this type of contract negotiation, write into their contract the specific team and put a penalty for that a flux in team. So that's one way we've seen that happen. I've also heard of clients who offer bonuses to their own internal team as well as to the external consulting team, a bonus at the end of the project for having stayed through the duration of a project as well. So that's one way to help insulate from personnel change.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, you can, there's a few different ways you can handle that. And we had Marcus Harris, who I think in the industry, who's an attorney that specializes in technology contracts and procurement, that sort of thing, from a legal perspective. But that's something that's interesting that I hadn't even heard him say was kind of working in some of these mechanisms to ensure or at least reward for consistency and continuity on the project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting question from I just lost it. Where is it? There it is. This is from I apologize for butchering the name in advance, but Vibhov on LinkedIn. He asked the question: any specific areas where companies have focused to spend in 2022? Maybe in particular, any trends you're seeing in terms of how and where companies are spending on technology. And he gives the example of, legacy app modernization or cybersecurity, or is it something else? What is it? Are you seeing trends in the types of technology that companies are spending on, or more open or against spending money on?
Mm-hmm. So I would say definitely in the HCM space, it has been a lot around employee engagement, skills development, and the ability to manage work teams as opposed to, like the infrastructure of HR. So it's like, how do we enable and empower our employees to move internally and to work cohesively across the business, department, and integrating, departments as opposed to looking at a department as a unit. So how do we enable that cross pollination of employees? So I think there's a lot that was focused in the HCM space on those two areas, and certainly recruiting and talent acquisition. That was huge this year. I think looking ahead to next year, I think cybersecurity and the pure play niche vendors are going to have the highest revenue growth rates, and not necessarily anything that is viewed as non-must-have solutions. So cloud data warehousing, security, intelligence, automation, anything that can show how do we reduce costs, how do we reduce risk, those I think will be more, those will be of higher revenue growth than, systems that are perceived as not business necessary.
Yeah, it's interesting how it sometimes takes a recession or economic uncertainty to force organizations to really think harder and smarter about how they're spending money. Because everything you're saying, you think, okay, that it's interesting that that's an outcome of the economy and sort of some of the challenges we're experiencing in the economy. But in reality, those are things that organizations should probably be doing even in good economic times too. But a lot of times they don't. They get a little sloppy and careless with how they invest and deploy technology. So sometimes it takes economic uncertainty to get them to be more disciplined and focus on some of this fundamental base. It sounds so basic when you're describing it, but yet so many organizations don't do that, during good times, especially.
And I think the big three questions customers are asking themselves are: number one, do we need it? Number two, can we reduce spend, in some way as a result of this, or, can we delay this project until, things are looking more positive in terms of macro economy.
Right. Interesting. Here's a question from Ronnie on YouTube. Ronnie asked the question: do you think massive cloud migrations are going to happen and have a bigger impact in 2023 than previous years in digital transformation projects? And what tech do you see being more relevant or prevalent in the market in 2023?
Mm-hmm. I think that there is still a tremendous demand for cloud migrations that will continue in 2023. And, I think the vendors that have a solution around, AI, customer and employee experience, and are enablers of, that sort of improved, experience, whether it's allowing customers to buy faster, easier, more efficiently, or employees to stay and engage and move internally. I think those are the software that we saw to have a tremendous amount of growth this past year and last year as well. because there was so much demand to ensure that people have that full digital experience, as opposed to the legacy type of interactions that were had in the past.
Right. Now, you talked a little bit about best of breed and how the ones that specialize in certain functions or high value areas are likely to be more successful in 2023 and beyond. But here's a question from Vabhav again. And again, I apologize for butchering the name. But is there any trend on vendor consolidation across the globe or in the US? So as you look to these smaller niche providers, are you starting to see consolidation? Do you think, if not, do you think there will be consolidation of that space? Will Oracle and SAP and Microsoft and those guys just go out and buy these smaller niche best of breed providers, or what do you think will happen there?
I think so. And, I think one of the reasons that it wasn't more prevalent in this past year, although there was a lot of vendor consolidation that did happen. But, I think that there was some thought that, the price was inflated. So I think next year, especially if, some of these more small, the smaller niche vendors are struggling to grow revenue, they're going to be ripe to be acquired by the big guys if they have an attractive, value prop to an SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, et cetera. And so I think there will be more of that in 2023 for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, what about this? This is a interesting question, and the part I find amusing is the account that is coming from on YouTube is an account called Business Productivity, and the question is there a need for business team productivity coaching in 2023? So it might be a rigged question here, but still, it's still a good one. Do you see business team productivity? And you talked a little bit about employee engagement and training and upskilling and things like that are becoming more prevalent, more common, more important to organizations, especially on the human capital management and HR tech side of things. Do you see productivity becoming a big thing, or continue? Is that changing in your view at all?
Absolutely. So the idea of business team productivity, I think there's always been a need for it, but what has changed in the last couple of years is this idea of productivity across the business. How do we, take our marketing department and have them easily be able to, be on the same sort of platform, same sort of productivity measurements as sales or accounting. So how do we get all of the different business functions to work effectively and efficiently together? I think that has been where some of the more modern technology has offered some real improvements than what has been had in the past. So it's the cross-functional efficiencies that I think are really hot right now.
Interesting. Very interesting. So we sort of went on a detour. I took us on a detour as you were talking through some of the general trends. And I know we talked about general satisfaction and the hybrid work situation, turnover and churn and attrition on projects. What other trends are you seeing in the market here in 2022 that we should be aware of as we go into the new year?
So overall, just to give you a couple of hard metrics that we have, on-time delivery for projects was 58%. So in 42% of cases, projects were late. On budget average was 61%. So 39% of projects went over budget to some degree, some way over budget. So that's what we heard in 2022. I wouldn't say there was a significant amount of change there to what we've seen in years past. It's give or take 5% in both areas. So not huge. However, what has changed is the cost for professional services. And, like everything else, inflation has hit professional services as well. It's more expensive for these consulting firms to maintain and grow their teams with all of the competitive pressures and the war for talent. So it's more expensive to pay these consultants, which means that is, those costs are going to be passed along to clients. So there's inflation. I think just in general, the cost for professional services is more expensive than it has been in the past. Um, another thing that we're seeing are the bigger players moving downstream. So vendors who've been focused on the enterprise sized and jumbo deals are now lasering in on the mid-market. And by mid-market, that's, let's say, 5,000 employees and below. And so, many of the vendors with the bulk of their revenues coming from the customers that have 5,000 and plus employees have modified, some pricing and implementation strategies to cater to smaller organizations, because the mid-market is where, the high volume and growth will be in the future, as opposed to the jumbo projects. So we've seen, again, bigger fish, bigger names, working within the mid-market and becoming more competitive with some more niche players. So I think that was something else that we observed as well, like smaller deals that, use large software that we haven't seen in the past.
Interesting. Now, what about I'm gonna take a question and sort of spin it into my own question here, but this is from Rushi on YouTube. Asked the question: how is demand of Oracle Oracle Fusion functional consultants? And I guess just more broadly speaking, especially for those that are listening in that are maybe looking for career guidance on what technology is going to provide the most opportunity or upside in 2023 and going forward. Are you seeing any specific vendors, not necessarily just in terms of market share, but just certain vendors that are really picking up steam or gaining momentum, or certain areas that are hotter than others in terms of specific vendors? Do you have any data that might shed some light on that?
I think in general, having certification and experience with the large, name brand vendors is a good thing. So, of course, Workday certified consultants are always in, tremendous demand, and that's also where we saw the biggest amount of churn last year. Specific to Oracle Fusion, I'm not exact. I wouldn't say that I'm have any specific expertise in that particular area. On the other hand, I think that there's a tremendous amount of purchases that are happening in that space. So, I would imagine that would be definitely a good skill set to have. SAP SuccessFactors, also the S/4HANA deals, there's a tremendous amount of growth there. So that sort of functional expertise, I think, would serve you well as well.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that, there hasn't been a material change to the on time and on budget metrics. You said it was sort of plus minus 5%, nothing, not a huge change. Whether or not those numbers are acceptable is a whole another story. But what you're saying is the trend's not really moving one way or the other. What if we look a little bit more broadly, not just at 2022, but sort of post-pandemic? Have those numbers changed in general since before the pandemic, especially with the remote, consulting support and the hybrid consulting support?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, they've gotten better since the pandemic, which is like the good news. When you look at our projects, though, that are reviewed, many of them are smaller in nature. And so the smaller projects are a little bit easier to keep on time and on budget when it's, 90 or 120 days versus the 18 months, which was typical pre-pandemic, more average sized projects. So on time, on budget has actually improved.
Interesting. Yeah, so maybe that's an upside or a silver lining to the pandemic, and that's super interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have thought maybe it might have slowed things down across the board. But I suppose organizations are just figuring out in general how to be more efficient and more effective with resources they have, especially now that I'll be curious to see if those numbers change at all with all the layoffs and organizations seemingly becoming more not conservative, but just leaner. They have less staff. As and there are a lot of companies that, even the ones that aren't laying off, are also putting hiring freezes in place and just sort of being conservative on the resource side of things. So I'll be curious to see if or how that affects transformations potentially in the future, because there's only so much you can outsource to an implementer and system integrator. You still need your internal resources to support the project if you want to be successful. So I'll be curious to see. I don't know if you have any thoughts or predictions on what might happen there, or if you think that will affect transformations in 23.
I think probably there will be an increase in need for staff augmentation. So the idea that, oh, we'll lay off our full-time employees, but then, for the course of this particular project, we'll look to a third party to supply, resources internally that, are more fluid. So I think there's the potential for staff augmentation to be more in demand in this next year with some of those layoffs for sure.
Interesting. Now here's a somewhat of a related question from Third Stage Consulting. On YouTube, asked the question, are system integrators and their customers starting to learn how to be successful in their implementations? And what are the differences between successful teams versus those that struggle? So when you look at these reviews, do you get the sense that in the last year or so that SIs and the implementing organizations are really starting to crack the code on figuring out how to make these complex transformations successful? And regardless of your answer to that, are you seeing any differences in the patterns between organizations that have higher degrees of success and satisfaction than ones that don't?
Well, I would say history repeats itself. So to some degree, I think the customers who have been through it before have learned from their previous mistakes. I would say the customers who struggled with projects are the ones who put the cart before the horse and led with technology and worked backwards instead of leading with, a clear picture of what the outcome needs to be internally. What are the business drivers? What are the impacts that we want to have? And then working backwards from there. Transformations should be tech enabled and not tech led. And where we've seen issues happening is where customers get excited about a new piece of software and the bells and whistles of the software, and just do a lift and shift of their existing process and data into this new software. And lo and behold, all of those great features and functions don't solve the issue that they set out to in the first place. So the ones who struggle are the ones who get too wrapped up in software. I would say the second issue, and this is the age-old problem. So back 4 years ago when I started this company, and even before that, the projects that fail are the ones who rush the implementation without proper preparation and a clear picture of what the outcomes need to be, and the ones that don't put the best people and best team on the project, both from an internal perspective and external. They're the ones that have a date in mind that we need to get to a go live by X date, and we'll put anybody on the project who can work on it, as opposed to being very thoughtful about who is the team that is going to get us to the most impactful results here. And, how can we make sure that by the date that we have in mind, we revisit our process, we revisit internal things that we need to do prior to, getting the software live.
Yeah, that's super interesting and really important. Two really important points you bring up, because if I could for a moment, I'll role play for a moment here and sort of I'll counter that, not with something I believe. This is something I strongly disagree with, but I'm going to role play with what typically happens in the sales cycle to counter those two things you just mentioned. Those two things I absolutely agree are critical, just super critical to the success of a project. You don't want to lead with technology. You want to lead with your business goals and objectives. And then the second one you mentioned, which, gosh, I just lost it. It was the Oh, not
The
being
people.
ready. The people in the readiness and making sure you're ready for the implementation. So if I'm a
Yeah.
software sales rep or system integrator, I don't want to hear that, because that's a problem for me, because I need you to go all in on my technology because I'm going to make more money, and I need you to start the project now. I've got 20 or 30 people I need to get staffed on this project next week, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make you not do those two things that you just said. So I'm going to say things like, hey, don't worry about, you do want to lead with technology, because I've got best practices. I've got pre-configured solutions, and you just use our software. That's going to define for you how your processes should look. So you should lead with the technology, would be my counter to that if I were a sales rep, which I'm not. But that's what I'd be saying if I were a software vendor or sales rep. I'd also be saying, hey, I've got 20 people that I'm ready to staff next week, but we're going to lose them. If you don't start this project next week, these 20 people, it's the A team, these are the best I've got, they're going to be gone. And so you better start the project next week, whether you're ready or not. And so the two super unhealthy counters to what you just said, but that's sort of the headwind you face when you're going into these projects, is you're going to hear something different oftentimes from the software vendor and system integrator that runs exactly opposite to what you just said, which is in your best interest, by the way. Everything you said is in your best interest. Everything I just said is not in your best interest. So how do you reconcile that? Or do you see organizations that, just, what you just described, those two things, do you see organizations doing that more, or is that still a challenge, or what do you think there?
Well, it's a reality to say, if a customer delays making a decision on a contract, SIs are not non-for-profit, so they need to put their best resources where they're actually making money. So they're not going to just let them sit waiting for the customer, the software customer, to make a decision. On the other hand, there's a balance there. By the time that you are starting to work with a consulting firm, they can actually be instrumental in that preparation process. So you don't just like call them in the minute that you're ready. I mean, they're the ones who are helping you think through, how do I need to change my processes before getting the piece of software in place. And when you can work with a good consulting firm early, they can help you plan that, put that blueprint together before you start, throwing a bunch of technology at your problem. And so I think the earlier you can, contract with a consulting firm, even, through the decision of what software is the right one for you, that's going to serve you well.
Yeah.
In terms of, software salespeople, they have quarterly numbers to hit, annual numbers to hit. And, so, of course they want you billing as soon as possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, it's okay to challenge what you're being told, or what's being recommended to you. I think what you said is accurate. You do need, on one hand, you need help. You want to make sure you're ready before you start deploying technology. On the other hand, you might need that outside help, and you probably do need that outside to help you through that process. But I think it's okay to challenge. Do we need the entire army to show up now? Are we ready for that entire army to show up now? Because that's in the software vendor and system integrator's best interest. It might be that part of the team, some of the more effective projects we've seen in terms of how organizations have used system integrators effectively, is you bring in a small subset of that team first to help you get ready. Then you bring in the army, once you're ready. But the problem is, a lot of times organizations don't ask the question of, wait, why are we bringing the whole army now? We're not, we haven't defined our processes yet, or we haven't figured out what we want to be, and we grew up and the meter's running now, now that we've got the army on site or on the project. So that's really good advice, and I think it's a good point. Here's more of a comment.
Even with the software purchase as well, you don't have to buy every single module from day one, and that's where a lot of regret is. A lot of those turn into shelfware over time. Start small and then go from there.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because we're coming up on that time of year where not only is it the end of the calendar year, but for a lot of software vendors, it's the end of their fiscal year. And so a lot of them are trying really hard to hit their numbers. And in order to hit their numbers, they're willing to give you these allegedly one-time deals that expire at the end of December, or at the end of whatever period, you might be in the future. So I think that's something that's where a lot of companies get into trouble, is they get enamored by these great deals that they got, these great end of year deals, but then they still just overspent on technology that they're never going to use. So I think you have to be real careful with that. And I have yet to see a software vendor that did not honor a deal that they put in front of a customer. They'll say, you have to sign this by the end of December in order to get this one-time deal that I worked, all the way up to the CEO. I had to work this up the chain, and they always make a big deal about it, about how big of a deal it is that you're getting this one-time deal. But we've seen a lot of clients that say, hey, we're not ready to sign a contract for all of it now. We might bite off part of it now, but 6 months from now, when it is time to buy the rest, most of the time, vendors are still going to honor that pricing because they want, they'd rather have that than no deal at all.
Right. Well, and I think about it like, going to Costco, and when you just need a jar of olives and you go to Costco and you get, 10 pounds of olives that end up going bad because you can't possibly, eat that many olives in a period of time. So even though it seemed like a great deal at the time, you probably would have been better off just, going to a local grocery store and getting what you needed in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What about, so Youssef on YouTube is asking as sort of a string of questions here. I'm gonna try and summarize it here. But he's talking about, he makes a comment about change management and business process mapping, which I presume, that came through the thread as we were talking about readiness and sort of preparing for your implementation. And then he makes a comment here that some cases even the SI can do this part, but the best consultancy firms. I'm not sure what he means by that, but I want to get to this other question here that he had. But he talks about, but part of digital transformation is assessments, and then the best practice in the 2B. Without getting too technical or too much into project management here necessarily, how do you see organizations sort of navigating that sort of understanding of current state with the need for an improved future state?
Yeah. Well, here again, best consulting firms can help clients look, understand what the before and after picture could look like, and particularly for their industry, for the size of client that they are, they're going to be able to bring in a wealth of experience if they've worked with other clients like you. So the before and after, I think, a good consulting firm, that's part of why you spend a lot of money with them, is that they can help you think through what that after picture should be like and what's realistic. I would say the other thing in terms of change management, customers tend to shortchange this area, and it's one of the biggest regrets that we see, is that clients don't, they try and make their engagement scope as cheap as possible, or make the low cost as possible, and will take out some of the change management that's recommended, and really regret that in the long term, because change management is so critical to project success.
Interesting. Well, I just realized that I had lost track of time here, and this is a great discussion. I think there's a lot more we could talk about, but I think you've given us a good overview of what some of the findings and trends are that you're seeing in the Raven Intel platform. What sort of closing advice might you leave with customers that are about to embark on some sort of digital transformation in 2023, particularly as it relates to choosing and leveraging an outside consulting partner, system integrator, implementation partner? What sort of closing advice would you give based on some of these metrics and findings that you've shared so far?
I would say spend as much time looking and selecting the partner that you choose for your transformation as much as you do choosing your software, because the right partner can make a project successful, and yet the wrong partner, if you choose the best software, it can work against you as well. And so, making sure that you are aligned with your partner, that you've done your homework and understand, what's the experience of others who have worked with this particular firm. That's huge, because a consulting firm can make and break your success. And so choosing the right one is critical in success for a project. And certainly that's where Raven Intel can help as well.
Yeah, and so if I go to Raven Intel, RAVENINTEL.com, I can see these reviews that you're talking about. I can see these for free. I don't need to pay or subscribe or anything like that. It's an open, sort of an open platform.
Yep, absolutely. You can look out there, and if you've done a project, review your partner out there and help others learn from your experience. We always are looking for customers to share what they've gone through, so others can learn from it. But absolutely. In addition to that, you can contact us. With questions, we can help you with a short list. Based on the reviews that we have as well. So we are here to make implementations better.
Well, good. Well, that sounds like a noble goal and a much needed service that you're providing in the digital transformation space. So I appreciate all you're doing with Raven Intel, and I also appreciate you being here today to share some of your findings and lessons with the audience here today. So thank you very much for being here today, Bonnie.
Thanks for having me. And here's to a great 2023.
Absolutely. It's a good way to leave it. And thank you to the audience, too, for the great questions. If you don't mind, just give us a like on this video, share it with colleagues. If you know anyone that might benefit from this conversation, please do so. And again, you can find the edited version of this recording and this conversation as part of next week's Transformation Ground Control podcast, which is a weekly podcast I host, released every Wednesday. So be sure to check that out on audio podcast platforms throughout the world, as well as YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. We stream it to those platforms every Wednesday morning, U.S. time. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Hope you all have a great week, and hope you're enjoying the end of your holidays, for those of you that celebrate the end of your holidays this time of year. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week on our Tuesday Digital Transformation live streams. Have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.